How we doing, everyone? Happy Friday. St. Patty's Day is right around the corner, so I'm an Irish person. I think we were originally Cosgrave before we came over here, so the Cosgroves are definitely going to be enjoying a few Guinnesses this week. But hope you're doing well. We're going to get right into it. This is a fun weekend ahead of us. We're mid-March. It's springtime. March Madness is around the corner. A lot of things to be optimistic about. So here's the top five stories we're going to hop into, then our three favorite social media posts, and of course, our three dad jokes, not to mention. We're going to talk about daylight savings time. What the hell does that mean to us, and why should we actually care about it? So, the first one is no forgiveness in China. What does that mean? Well, it has something to do with real estate. I will tell you that much. The second thing that we're going to touch on is why you should actually want to rent versus buy. This is not a market to buy, even though that's the American dream. And I can actually give you specific numbers that shows just how big of a gap and why it is not a wise decision to actually try and buy. The third thing, we're going to talk about Robinhood, the guy that steals from the rich and gives to the poor, or Robinhood, the platform, very big in the GameStop movie, or Stupid Money, which is actually a very good movie if you want to watch that. Then we're going to talk about, are you still supporting your adult children, and what does that mean? Guess what? A lot of people still are, because it's rather challenging financial times, and it's only seemingly getting worse. And then near and dear for many of the boomers that might be watching this, Social Security struggles. People are addicted to this idea of Social Security. I, for one, don't even plan to have any form of Social Security, just because, well, I don't have a lot of faith that is actually going to be there in 30 years' time when I can actually access retirement benefits. So those are the top five stories that we're going to get into. But before we do that, let's talk about a LinkedIn poll question. Our weekly LinkedIn poll question just asks the simple question of, if you had $1 million idea that could 10x your current income, would you pursue it or not? And the only three options that you can give are yes, no, or it depends on how much money I currently have. So again, if you had $1 million idea, this is for people to see how entrepreneurial of a spirit you have. If you have $1 million idea, would you actually chase after it? Or would you say, nope, I'm already comfortable with my actual salary, so I don't want to chase it. So I'm very curious to hear what people actually do say. I can tell you based on the current rankings, there's a lot of people that say yes, or it depends on how much money I have. But again, and also if you're on Instagram, don't be watching on Instagram. We're on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, all that stuff. No need to be on here because you can't see any of the crap that I'm actually putting up on the screen. So anyhow, if you do want to vote, you can go to the LinkedIn page that I have. But I'm curious to see what other people say. I will say last week's LinkedIn results, it was overwhelmingly amount of people saying they hated the idea of daylight savings time and they didn't see the necessary change for it. So hey, maybe if some politicians are watching, maybe this could be worthwhile for it. Yes, Jess, hello there. Yeah, LinkedIn, it's a great place to be. But that's where Stupid Dan likes to talk about all of his things. All right, now we're going to get quickly into the market year to date before I start hitting on the top five stories. So market year to date, guess what? There's a lot of green there. And if you're a Bitcoin person, then you are probably having a hell of a day, or a hell of a year, or a hell of a last 18 months realistically, because it has been on fire. I personally don't invest in Bitcoin, but hey, to each their own. The other three major market indices are all up, and that's good. The 30-year mortgage is the only thing that still continues to be a pain in the ass. It's at 6.88% as the time of me talking to you right now. We know that can fluctuate a bit. That's 4% up versus the start of this year. Fed funds rate and prime rate has not changed. We certainly hope that the Fed funds rate will come down, because once that does come down, oh God, we can all take a breath of fresh air in the real estate market, or just in the general economy, knowing that things will hopefully get to that soft landing that Powell's been aiming for and his colleagues at the Federal Reserve. All right, well, here's talking about something in no forgiveness. And what do I mean by that? Well, that's what our dear friends in China have actually said. They said to Chinese real estate developers, if you're looking for a government lifeline, you're getting the opposite of it. Today is Darwinism in China, and they are saying survival of the fittest. According to the Chinese Minister in Housing of Urban Renewal, his name is Ni Hong, he said businesses that are, or real estate companies that are seriously insolvent, and I read this directly, have lost the ability to operate, must go bankrupt. Wow. How's that for a vote of confidence from your government? Here in America, we tend to get bailouts if we get too big to fail. China's doing the exact opposite of that. And yes, Jeff, I'm sure I have a pet lizard as well. Thank you for that. I should not have. God, I need to find a way to block Jeff in the future. But yeah, in China, they stopped actually giving loans out to developers in about 2020. And it sent that $5 trillion real estate sector just into a downward spiral. Evergrande, for instance, if anybody's heard of Evergrande, was once valued at $50 billion, $50 billion. They now trade at less than a penny. So China has definitely taken a polar opposite approach to how to support an economy. But I'm very curious what other people might think of whether this is a good idea to just let the big companies go bankrupt, or you try to subsidize them and have them hold on to another day. All right, that's story number one. Story number two, renting versus buying. I, of course, am involved in real estate, so of course I like when people rent. Hell, I rented for most of my life, and if you've ever read Rich Dad Poor Dad, it will always tell you that a house is a liability, not an asset. But still, the American dream is to own a house. And for the majority of Americans, they still want to be able to accomplish that. But when you really start looking at it from a dollars and cents perspective, it makes no sense whatsoever. So let me just give you some math right now. I think it was the median sales price in early 2020 was about $400,000, and that's since gone up about 40%. And at that same time, and as late as 2022, mortgage rates were sitting in between, it went from 3% to 6.8%. So again, if we go back to that $400,000 purchase price, if you were at a 3% interest, you're more or less on a 30-year mortgage paying just shy of, let's say, $1,400 a month. Same price, $400,000, but now you're sitting at that 6.8% or 6.88, which is what it is currently today, and you're looking at closer to $2,100 a month. So a $700 delta for the exact same piece of property if you are trying to be an owner. Now, you might be thinking, well, still, it's a rite of passage. It gives me comfort, security, safety, all of that stuff. And yeah, I know the visual on the screen that I have certainly does talk about that. But when you look at it and like get into the details of it, Realtor.com, pretty big group, probably saw some of their Super Bowl commercials. They found that in 47 of the 50 largest cities in the United States, that it is much smarter to actually rent versus buy. Austin, Texas, for instance, which Austin, a great city to go to if you haven't been there before, it is actually 2x higher, more than 2x higher. The exact numbers is you would actually be paying about $4,000 a month on a mortgage for a like-for-like asset versus closer to $1,700 a month as a renter. So yeah, before you start thinking about like, hey, I absolutely must be buying, no, really talk it through, talk with a financial advisor, somebody, but don't just jump into buying because you believe that is the rite of passage. It would not be a financially smart decision. So anyhow, that is story number two. Moving on to story number three, Robin Hood, the guy that steals from the rich and gives to the poor. Well, this guy, Ryan Tesco, who's an executive vice president over at Cardone Capital, you probably heard of Grant Cardone. Well, he shared a promising outlook on where he thinks the real estate market is going to be going here. And when asked on the current market landscape, Tesco expressed optimism, saying that it is going to be a Robin Hood moment in the next 12 to 18 months. And quote unquote, I think there are going to be fantastic deals in the sweet spot in between $20 and $150 million. That's widely attributed to the tsunami of debt that is currently going on in the industry. And according to a lot of industry data, I've got three talking points I want to hit. The Mortgage Bankers Association estimates that $4.5 trillion of commercial and real estate loans are on lenders' books, with roughly 60% coming due by 2027. Multifamily properties account for the largest share of maturities, exceeding $1 trillion. And more than $700 billion in loan maturities is expected this year, with multifamily and office sectors facing the largest share. So if you're an investor looking to capitalize on these opportunities, well, look for the right ones, get into the right deals, plan for the long term. But go after it, get those deals, lock them up. All right, let's get into now the element of having to support your kids. And again, if you're on Instagram, you're not going to be able to see this, but if you're on all other platforms, you're going to see the stat that's pretty eye-popping. And you'll see there that 67% of Gen Zs are still getting support from their parents. 28% of millennials are still getting support from their parents, and 14% of Gen X are still getting support from their parents. And why is this occurring? Well, many experts argue that the current landscape has created a significant challenge for young adults. I'm a young adult. I can definitely vouch for that. and trying to achieve financial independence, there's a lot of things that are going against us. For instance, lower wages. When you compare from a inflation perspective, they are much lower than anything that our parents' generation had. You also have student loan burdens. You've just got mounting loads of debt at high interest rates that makes it really high obstacles to try and get around. And so you have a lot of parents now that are trying to extend a helping hand to their adult children. And thank you, parents, for doing that. If you are, you're a godsend. And according to savings.com, the average monthly financial support that a parent provides is about $1,400. So now you just kind of understand, if you are getting support, you're not alone, because the unfortunate fact of the matter here in the United States and around the world is that the younger generations are being hit with a lot of things that just previously weren't being experienced in other generations. So thank you, parents, if you are supporting. All right, let's talk about another thing, and hopefully our parents are aware of this because they are probably at Social Security age. And every year you have the COLA, not Coca-Cola, but the cost of living adjustment. It's less tastier, but hopefully it creates more money for you. Well, the COLA has adjusted again for Social Security. But seniors are still feeling kind of shortchanged. And the reason being is that USA Today, a rather reputable source, did some research, and they found that the average retiree benefit increased with the COLA adjustment by just shy of $60 a month, which that equates to about $700 a year. That seems pretty good, right? But it's not, because the fact of the matter is it didn't keep up with inflation. So those same seniors that are getting about a $60 increase are also seeing about $185 a month increase in their expenses, meaning they are actually losing $125 a month. I don't know if that's sustainable. That's maybe why you're going to see a lot of boomers entering back into the workforce, whether it's going to be consultants if it's high end, or if they're just working at a Walmart. But this is where I strongly advise you, if you are just planning for Social Security to be there for you in your retirement years, I would say think different. Try to find other ways to create a more sustainable revenue stream for yourself and your family for the long term. So I beg the question to you guys out there, do you actually think Social Security is actually going to be around in 30 years' time? Yeah, I don't know. All right, so that's our top 5 stories. Let's hit now my 3 favorite social media posts. And the first one is, this is just about productivity. Yes, I'm crazy. I like to talk about productivity. And they say a lot of the people, gosh, I forget the crazy stat it was, like the 40% of people that actually write down their to-do list end up actually being much more successful in life, just because they can actually track it. What gets measured gets achieved. So with that in mind, when we're talking about productivity, the big things to think about is it's all about focus and not the number of tasks that you're doing. Now, with that being said, if you do have a lot of things, write it down on a checklist. I write it down on a piece of paper here. In fact, this is the one that I've just accumulated in the last week. And so anyhow, you just want to write it all down there. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're most important things. It just means there's things that are going to be living rent-free in your head if you don't put it down on paper at least. And so you want to do a brain dump on it. Then you want to separate those tasks out from what's important to what's not important versus what's urgent, what's not urgent, etc. Create a morning routine. I love doing that. I'm ridiculous. My wife hates that I wake up at 5 and do my workout, and I'm way too happy and energetic while she's needing the coffee to get going, essentially. And then what I try to do a lot in the morning, and people probably know this when they try to block time with me, is I don't make my mornings available for people. I block those times. I do the Pomodoro technique of trying to just attack things. That's why you commonly see a lot of these live sessions on a weekly basis are 25 minutes. Pomodoro technique is 25 minutes, take 5 minutes off, 25 minutes, take 5 minutes off. So that's how I try to do it, to time chunk it. And then everything that I do with an end in mind. So I try to connect those tasks with those end goals that I'm trying to ultimately accomplish. Whether it makes sense at this point in time, no. I have to think longer term than just the most 25 minutes that I'm burning right now. And then I try to stop overloading my list. I was showing this. This is a pretty large list, but not all of those things are urgent or immediate. It's just I don't want to forget it, so I write it down. And then I try to review it at the end of the day. And that I actually try to do via my phone. I do a self-reflection every day, and that allows for me to track the things that were successful and not successful. So that is the first thing I wanted to share. And again, if you're on Instagram, you're not able to see what I actually popped up on the screen, but that's okay. Someday you'll end up on LinkedIn or YouTube or any other place where I have that. The next one is a good friend, James Murphy. Awesome person if you like talking about Airbnbs. And he just laid something out. And again, if you're on Instagram, you can't see it, but I'll write down what I'll verbalize what he put in his Instagram post, and that was the American dream: $100,000 college, $10,000 engagement ring, $30,000 wedding, $50,000 car, $500,000 house. You accumulate massive debt in your 20s and spend the rest of your life working a job to pay for that. Is that really the American dream, or is that modern slavery? That's the question that James Murphy is asking. And tell you what, I don't disagree with him. I do believe that there's smart debt, and I believe there's bad debt. And sometimes it really sucks when you're in bad debt. But if you can get smart debt and intelligently go after your numbers, then by all means go after it. But look for cash flowing assets, things that are able to produce income just versus being an unnecessary burden for you. Be very careful out there in the market right now. It is a challenging place. So James, thanks for that, man. And then I'm going to end my 3 favorite social media posts with the guy that, honestly, he's just awesome. Ed Mylett, the person that's going to become the next Tony Robbins of this generation. And it's much more motivational in intent. But what Ed says, and I'm not going to read his full thing that I have up on the screen, but all he's hitting on is, hey, if you're the same person that you were last year or even yesterday, then you're not growing. And if you're not growing, then there's no way that you're going to be the best version of you. And so then he lays out all the things that you have to be able to focus on yourself first. And actually, my CEO over at Nike, I specifically remember him saying this of focusing on yourself first is not selfish, it's selfless. Because if you can't take care of yourself, there's no way you can take care of anybody else. So just remember that, don't beat yourself up too much if you do need to take time for yourself, because ultimately that will make you a better man, woman, father, son, mother, etc. So just focus on making yourself great, because I know by making yourself great, you're going to be able to actually help a lot other people much more effectively. So prioritize that. All right. So we flew through that. And yes, I'm going at a faster rate of speed because guess what? It's just kind of fun to talk fast these days. All right. We're going to talk about daylight savings. Yeah, it's so fun, right? And I wrote about that in the Sunday blog. And you know what? I'm going to take a quick drink of water because I've been rolling. So, daylight savings. Where should we begin? Most people by this stage now, we're 5 days in after daylight savings. We've adjusted. They generally say most of the population adjusts within the first 7 days. Some people can then actually take a full month to adjust. And I mean, I was reading an Amaze Health blog yesterday where they're talking about, I think heart attacks jumped 22% the day after daylight savings. So I really don't like daylight savings, I'll tell you that much, but I can't bitch about it too much. Car accidents went up. I think fatal car accidents increased 6% the day after daylight savings. So just why do we have it? But anyhow, I'll tell you kind of why we have it. Our dear friend Benjamin Franklin created this back in 1784. And then we really started adopting it in the early 20th century as a response to energy conservation efforts during World War I. And since that time, many countries have, adopted the form of daylight savings, and its effectiveness and necessity is still debated to this day. But I don't know if you caught on that it was Franklin that introduced this in 1784. And so that means this routine of switching our clocks twice a year, and the fact that it was adopted in the early 20th century, that's been dragging on for well over 100 years. But a lot has changed over the last 100 years. So you might be wondering, why do we have daylight savings time? And here's why. Here are just some of the key reasons why. One, energy conservation. People do believe that by springing forward, we're able to utilize a lot of daytime, and that helps us reduce our climate and energy sources by utilizing natural light. So maybe, but again, we have some pretty good energy efficient things. Economic consideration. I'm a golfer. I know my father-in-law. Hey, John, how you doing? He's also a golfer, and a lot of people like to be able to golf after work. So you have, and then you got breweries and a lot of outdoor activities where people actually enjoy the daylight, and it actually does boost the economy by doing that. So by having extra daylight after work, it tends to actually help local businesses succeed. Then you've got just the traditions and habit. Like, people are more familiar with that, and so they want to continue to keep a tradition because it's harder to change out of a tradition or a routine than to just keep it the way it is, especially if there's no real change in perceived benefits. Then you have just legislation and policy. Not sure if you know this, but governments like to find things to argue about for no real reason at all. And this is just one of them. So some people, like I said, my poll last week, I think 80% of people said they hated daylight savings time. So if that made people hated it, then why hasn't the government just said, okay, yeah, we should probably do away with it if 80% of the population? But yeah, it just has politically sensitive issues involving coordination among different stakeholders and a whole bunch of various factors. And so until you kind of get out of that stalemate or that blockade, you're never really going to see a change. So that's why we have daylight savings time. But here's the reason. Well, I'm not going to bitch about daylight savings time anymore. I'll just talk about what are the lessons we can actually learn from it. And I think there's 3 lessons in particular that I believe we could actually learn from daylight savings. And the first is adaptation and flexibility in response to changing circumstances. Similar to our dear friends in China that said there will be no forgiveness for real estate developers and that they must essentially survive, or survival of the fittest, Darwinism. That's adaptability. This is the same thing with daylight savings time. We are going to be tested and expected to be able to adapt to our environment. Our circadian rhythm is going to need to be able to change in order to evolve more successfully and able to enjoy the spring and summer times. So adaptability and flexibility is number 1. Number 2, the need to continually evaluate our practices and policies in light of new information. And so this one, again, we hit on Franklin suggested this in 1784. It was fully adopted in the early 20th century. It's been over 100 years. There's been a ton of changes that have actually occurred since that time, but yet we haven't made any changes. And when you look at just regular businesses, the ones that succeed are the ones that are continually looking to pivot and evolve. Because the ones that don't pivot and evolve become extinct. And so if you have new information that suggests that this is not the right way of doing it, but instead we should be doing this over here, well, by all means, we should be looking at that new information to make a more informed decision. Now, let's not get over the top. I know baseball season's starting, and you know how Moneyball created all these things where it's all data, data, data. There is some gut to it as well, but definitely utilize new information to your favor. And then the third thing, which I hit on it earlier, of just like, hey, policies are policies. It does underscore with daylight savings time the complexity of decision making and the need to balance competing interests and considerations. Although I might think it, and the 80% of people that voted in my poll last week might think that daylight savings time should just be done away with it, we might have a very narrow lens as to why we think it should be done. First, when you're looking at it from the aspects of energy consumption, public health, economic activity, and social behavior, there's a lot of different moving variables and have different impacts on the people that are wanting it or not wanting it. So always remembering that it's not a white or black type things. There's a big gray area that we have to address to make sure that everybody's interests are commonly aligned. So anyhow, those are my overall lessons I've learned from daylight savings time. I'm no longer tired. Hopefully you're no longer tired. But maybe you're tired of listening to me. So what I'm going to now get into is our 3 favorite dad jokes, because who doesn't love dad jokes to end their day of listening to me ramble? And we're going to do these for March. What March flowers grow on faces? Tulips. Oh, that was a good one. Thank you, computer, for chiming in right there on time. What season is it when you are on a trampoline in March? Springtime. Man, all right. And our third and final one is, why is everyone so tired on April 1? Because they've just finished a long 31-day march. All right, that was so much fun, everyone. Hey, this will be uploaded to YouTube, LinkedIn. It will be there whenever you want it. Thank you for tuning in. If you did tune in, or if you're just going to watch the recorded, I don't blame you. Be well. Take care. See you next week. Bye.